So today is week 5 of Creating a Life with God, and we are working on prayer practice 5, which is the examen. And I'm just curious if anybody had ever really heard of the examen before we got started with this chapter.
No.
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 Marisa,
Mm-hmm.
did you have any experience using it?
I tried. When I praise God and thank God, I for some reason I need to do that vocally.
Okay.
So the examen doesn't really work for me. Now my writing, when I journal, I mean, I can see where I start, and then as I keep writing, God takes over
Sure.
and things. But it's maybe I was doing it wrong, but so I'm anxious to learn more about it.
Okay. So there's really a couple of different ways to do the examen, and we're gonna kind of talk about that, the practical aspects of that a little bit later on. And then you'll have a choice when we go to do our time together, well, actually individually, which kind of way that you want to do it. So if you want to think it through, if you want to write it out, and I'm going to give you a different way to sort of do something physical with it, and all of those are good. Again, these prayer practices are really about um, adapting to how you and your unique personality, right, work sometimes. And so it may not work for you the same way, exact way that it works for somebody else, but you can still get a benefit of connection from it. So this one goes all the way back to Saint Ignatius, and it was so that we're talking the 1500s. He wanted a prayer practice that would sort of help God feel closer. And so the examen is kind of an exercise in which you are taking time to think through a period of time and kind of see what you notice about how close you felt to God, how far away you might have felt from God, what was going on in those times, so that we can become more aware, right, of noticing God's presence and nearness um, on a more consistent basis in our lives. A lot of times we go through our day, we are so busy, and we oftentimes become very task oriented. I have this to get done, and this, and this, and this. And we have moments with people, and sometimes we have the awareness to go, oh, this might be an interruption to my list, but this is a really good interaction and I'm really enjoying this with someone, right? Um, but a lot of times it's like we get to the end of the day and we're thinking back through things and we're like, oh, I missed this opportunity here, right? Like they wanted to talk to me and I just sort of was like, I'm I've got my list, right? It was a perfunctory sort of, hey, how are you? And moving on. And sometimes that happens with us with God too. Like we're so busy, we've got all these things, and we don't notice um, moments where God feels close. A lot of times we can do it in hindsight. You know, you look back through your life and you can see moments where God was directing you, and you can see God's hand at work. But in the moment, it may not have felt like that at all to you, right? And so the examen is kind of a way for us to take a look at those things. On in the chapter top of 78, the big question of the examen is, where is God in all this? Whereas silent prayer seeks to move us beyond this world of ours, the examen helps us find the God who is moving toward us, who is reaching into our world to save us. That God is moving toward us. And so, how can we be aware of where God is? If you've ever had or heard us talk about prevenient grace in church, prevenient grace is the grace of God that goes before in our lives, before we know that we're a sinner, before we know that we need God, before we may even understand who God is, or how to connect with God. God's already working in our lives through the Spirit with this prevenient grace that is sort of coming out to sort of woo us and draw us into God. And that's kind of at the heart of this examen. It's not that God is out there somewhere and we have to find God. God is moving towards us all of the time, but often we're just not aware of it. And so the examen is trying to help us take the blinders off and be more aware of how God is moving toward us. Questions, thoughts, comments?
I have to tell you, I read this chapter 3 times. I had a hard time with it.
Okay.
And part of it may be my age, because, I'm not, my life has been wonderful, but
Mhm.
I don't really focus on the bad times so much anymore.
Sure.
I didn't like at first the words consolation and desolation, that he used.
Yeah. Sure.
I couldn't get a handle on those. So,
Okay.
I think I'm understanding it a little bit now, the practice, but it took me a while to get through this chapter and to get some sense of understanding it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
I didn't learn all of the backstory about examen. My first experience before I started practicing it, my first experience with it was I ordered a daily journal from a publishing group that works a lot with women and women pastors, and it's called Sacred Ordinary Days. So it's a hardcover daily journal, and they have the examen. They have pages for the examen throughout the journal. So they have one for the beginning of the year, sort of think back through the last year, right? Think about how you want to move towards God this year. They have one every Sunday for the beginning of the week. They have one at the beginning of major church seasons. So Lent, Advent, and they have some guided questions in there, which is what I emailed you all. It was the weekly examen. And I'm going to post that link to that page in the video comments too, for folks that are going to watch later. So I didn't learn all the big words and all of the theory about it before I started practicing it. And I think that might have been easier in a way.
Mhm.
But I've found it to be a helpful journaling exercise. And to think about journaling as prayer was also helpful for me, because I do like to write.
Mhm.
And so sometimes when I'm just trying to sit and pray, especially maybe in silence, my mind feels really scattered. But if I have a journal prompt in front of me, I can kind of hone in on that.
Mhm.
So yeah, well, thank you for acknowledging that. We're gonna try and make it succinct and easier for us to kind of grasp as we're going forward. On 79, he just says that The examen is the notion that individuals engage in actions that move them either towards or away from God. But the movement in either direction can sometimes appear good in the present moment. So this is where he gets into denial a little bit about things. Um, so a little further down the page, it says, if either spirit can appear to be from God in the present moment, what's the solution for the person who wishes to follow God? Ignatius bases his answer on Paul's understanding that the movement of the spirit bears fruit. So the reality of time helps us to determine if we're on the right path, right? So kind of helps us reflecting, taking time to reflect, helps us make sure that we're following the right voice and that we are moving in the right path. So the book breaks it down for talking about, let's see, 80 and 81, practicing the examen. Proper intention. So sort of coming before God and with the right spirit and attitude. So what I just want to say about proper intention is that this is not something that you want to do just cold, like pick up a pen and start writing or sit down and just start thinking through the questions. You need to take a few moments, maybe for silent prayer, maybe to concentrate on breathing and just relaxing to be able to do that. Find a quiet place without distractions, right? That's so key for so much of the prayer practices that we've been working on. But to set the stage, just like you don't normally read your Bible without like a novel that you just pull off the shelf and start to read, we tend to pray and ask for wisdom and guidance when we're doing that. It's the same kind of thing as we're doing the exam, and we just want to get in a space where we are we're ready for whatever might come up, and we're ready for God to reveal himself to us. And then you're going to pick a time period. Yeah, Giselle.
So, depending upon the type of style of prayer that you might practice, is it appropriate then, if you're in prayer, just to ask God that question and wait for his response?
Yeah, I think you can. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So the second biggest thing, once you're sort of ready to go and in the right headspace, is making sure that you know what segment of time you're going to be reflecting on. Your whole life is probably too big of a chunk at any one given time. A year is probably about as much really as can be done in one swoop. I found that one harder to start with. But I've gotten to the point now where I can do that one. I've been doing the examen now for 6 years with the journal. And the weekly one is such a great rhythm. I look forward to doing that on Sundays, right? As part of my get up and get ready to go, and my devotional time on Sunday morning is the examen of, okay, let's look back on this past week. Where did I sense you? Where did I not? Where was I really connected? What was going on? Okay. And then kind of clearing that and getting ready for this. How do I want to be different maybe this week? Where do I need to pay attention this week? Right. And kind of setting the stage for that. So there's all kinds of different questions that you can use to sort of reflect. He offers some on page 82. What are the feelings of life and love that stir in you a movement towards God? What thoughts or memories leave you feeling dry, dead, stale, and move you away from the vitality of a living creator? Do your thoughts begin with feelings of light and love but end with emptiness? Do you desire to love and love God even if you are struggling with something painful? So he's got those questions. The ones I emailed to you, it's not as specific as that. Where have you been near to or far from God's presence? And think through the past week with a posture of humility and gratitude. Note what comes up. So, it can be simple with just a few questions. You could have a whole list, right? But picking a day is probably an easy place to start. Like, so maybe today when we're doing this, if you just want to think through yesterday, something that's fresh in your mind, maybe where did you really sense God's presence? Where were you not aware of it at the time, but now you can see it? Where did you feel far away from God? Right? Just reflecting on those kinds of things. What else stood out for you from the chapter? Yeah, Marisa.
I loved the story that he told in the section, The Practice in Action, with the trip to Nova Scotia, and how a normal person would have called it quits and gone back home. He just kept going because he felt that's where, I just love that whole story, because luckily when I made those decisions to do things because I felt that that's where God was leading me, everything was click, 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 click. I don't know how I would have reacted if there had been stumbling blocks.
Right. Yeah. Usually we interpret the click, click, click as, oh, good, God opened all the doors. Now we can walk through them.
Yeah.
And what do you do when you feel like you heard a very clear message from God and it doesn't seem like other people got the same message, right? It's harder. So yeah, how do you deal with that? How do you know that you're on the right path? So yeah, it's a good story. Anybody else?
I'm sorry. I think also as I begin to read this and so forth, you realize that maybe you have been doing the practice, but not knowing that you were doing it, that it was formalized, that you go back and reflect on an event, an activity, a career path, an incident with family or whatever. And then when you begin to tear that apart, you realize that you have been practicing the examen, but not knowing that you were doing it and that it was actually a formal practice.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point too. There's so little information that we communicate about how to pray. I think we've talked about this once before, that we tell everybody, oh yes, we need to pray. And the Lord's Prayer is a great prayer that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, right? And prayer's important and you should do it every day, and the longer the better, right? And you hold up these examples of people like John Wesley, who got up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and prayed for a couple of hours in his prayer closet, and you're going, I must not be, a really great, faithful Christian because I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. And then to go, okay, so maybe my prayer time's better at night. And maybe I can pray while I'm gardening, or while I'm walking, or while I'm journaling, or just being still and silent before God. And oh, gracious, all of these ancient Christians knew about all of these things and developed all of these practices around all of these. And sometimes it's just things we stumble into, but because it doesn't fit the model that we sometimes get communicated, then we feel like we don't know what we're doing. And we're just kind
Or
of
somehow that we failed God.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think one of the things that that gave me the most freedom was realizing that, you didn't have to have a specific journal to do your quiet time with. You didn't have to use a specific devotional. You didn't have to have a specific set amount of time. And the freedom of being able to create that space in a way that was meaningful for me. I understood the rhythm is important. You need to do it, every day and frequently, right? But to be able to create that space with God in a way that is unique for me, and was such a gift, when I felt like I didn't have to fit some arbitrary mold that people had given over the years. One of my classes in June, we talked about the examen, and she had us stand up, and she had us do it in a different way. She called it rummaging backward through your day, and that you would start with some moments where you felt disconnected from God. So you were just like, you would take a few steps backward and think about, like maybe the evening of the day before, and think about like how you may have felt disconnected or things from God. And you sort of, so you walked, backward and forward as you felt disconnected or connected as you were kind of walking through your day. Which again, if you're a person who needs to be doing something, right? Standing up and walking around while you do this might be a helpful way to think through. Okay, so like here's the evening, here's the afternoon, here's the morning, and kind of move back and forth as you're feeling it. Or, just to sit and think through a couple of questions, or to have a long list that you can journal through, right? All of those are different ways to practice the same kind of thing. The heart of the examen is reflection. How is God moving towards me? How might I be moving towards God, or how might I be moving away towards God, away from God, and I don't even realize it, right? And so that's the piece, that's the core piece. And you can take that and do it in so many different ways. But examen is just about an inner reflection and an examination, and where is God in all of this? That's Ignatius's big question. Where is God in all of this? Because we often miss God in little moments, everyday, mundane moments, because we're waiting for something big and flashy. And it can be as simple as noticing where God is. Sometimes with the staff, at staff meetings. I just ask people to share, what's your biggest God sighting from this past week? And they take them a few minutes to sit through and think, gosh, where did I really notice God show up? Right? And a lot of times they're surprising things. It's in places that they didn't expect God to show up. And it's a conversation, it's a note, it's seeing the light bulb go off for somebody and getting something about their relationship with God. And they're really beautiful to hear. When people take a few moments to think, and that is in some ways another form of this examen. Where did you see God show up this week? And how did you experience God's presence? And we just call it God sightings, and share those as we gather. It's easy to get together and share the problems, right? Oh, there's this thing I have to work on, or there's this, this is what's going on and I need to fix it. Okay, before we get to any of that, where have you been seeing God? And what we start looking for, we pay more attention to, we notice more of, right? If you ever move into a day where you start off joyful and happy, do you notice a lot of the times that you see joyful and happy things, right? If we start off with a very sad or angry kind of mood filter for our day, gosh, we notice every annoyance and irritation all day long, right? So what we're orienting ourselves to, we notice more of. And the examen helps us orient ourselves to an awareness of God's presence. And the more we practice it, the more easily and we're able to say, oh, there God is. I am not out here on my own, but God is right here in the midst of these things. So do you want to practice? Oh, yes, Giselle.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the weekly form that you sent out.
Yeah.
In that, I think I understand that you practice something like this or similar, or on this model at least. Do you rigorously reflect on each one of the categories that are listed here?
Okay, so so the paper that I sent out has the categories: spirit, body, mind, relationships, home, work, resources. So I will tell you that I'm type A. So at the beginning, if there's a form, I'm going to fill it out. And at the beginning, I did every category, right? And sometimes it was hard to pick a particular category, to think through one. I give myself a lot more permission now. A lot of weeks, it's what I'm writing down is not even full and complete sentences. It's, here's a phrase, or here's an incident, or here's something, so that I can keep that in my mind. Some weeks I just use the space they give me, and I just write all through it about my general sort of impression for the week, and I don't always focus in on all the categories. So you can do as much or as little with that. I like to think of it all as guidelines and suggestions, and sometimes they work and sometimes they're not the most helpful. So, yeah.
So from that aspect, then the reset is how we think we hear God leading us to improve in a particular, whatever improvement means
Yeah.
to you or me in a particular category. And again, you could have reset without reflect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on the next part of it,
Mhm.
it includes weekly priorities.
Yeah.
And weekly priorities, is this toward reset?
So
Or is
that one's probably more just in general, like that's the other side of this is the general journal page for Sunday. It just happens to go on this twofold thing. So the examen's over here. This is my journaling space for Sunday, and then, you know, the lectionary passages, and then usually in weekly priorities, I do gratitude journal because I make this work for me. So every night or every morning when I get up, I am jotting down at least 3 things that I can think of that I'm grateful for from the previous day. That's one of the ways I trained myself with my spiritual director when I found myself becoming very cynical several years ago, right? Was to look for the joy, look for the gifts. And so I always write those down. So again, I just do my own thing in the pages.
Thank you for letting me dive into the
Yeah.
details as they relate to me.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And the thing about reset, so like under mind, so maybe I realized that I spent a lot of time trying not to reflect in a week. I surfed a lot of Facebook and internet and didn't really spend any time, in any kind of thinking about stuff. I was just trying to escape the week. Sometimes that happens when you're stressed, right? You just try to things that'll just get you out of that. And so maybe my reset in that would be trying to limit some of my internet time so that I can spend more time being reflective or aware, right? That's just that's how it might work for me in a particular week. Mhm.
So just coincidentally, in the past week, I was looking at a different type of journal, which was listed maybe Monday for 5 different consecutive weeks on the same page, and then Tuesday. And the intent was that it forced you a week later to go back and look at what you had done on Monday from the previous weeks and see how God had worked or how life had happened. Do you reflect on the reset after?
Sometimes when I go to do the next week's examen, I'll glance back and look at, okay, what did I say I was going to do for this week? How did I live into that? Oh, I did that one. Oh, this one's not, I didn't connect on this one,
But it's for you. So sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes not. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be so dominant.
No, this is the practical stuff that we don't just always sit down and talk with people about and share. So, my thought was for our practice time today that we would take yesterday as our day, or let's just pick a 24-hour period. If you want to use Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of this week, whichever one you care most about, but just pick a 24-hour period. Okay. And then, let's see. he gave us some other questions. Do you all have your book? Okay, so in the appendix at the back, so it's 180 if you have a hard copy. I don't know where it would be in the Kindle, Marisa, but it's in the appendix under the examen. There's a few questions that are a little bit different than the questions in the chapter that might be helpful.
Mhm.
As you think about your period of time, what am I most least grateful for? When did I feel a sense of love, peace, joy, life, the gifts of the Spirit? When did I feel exhausted, dead, drained, angry, mean? What specific thoughts or experiences draw my attention? What repel me? What moments speak to me of my deepest desires? What things feel out of place or uninteresting? He says some questions you might ask yourself. You don't have to do an exhaustive list. If you feel drawn to a couple of questions, great. If not, great. You can skip them. But here's the important two that are italicized. When did I notice God during this time? And what felt like a time of God's absence? Okay. So, what I thought we would do is take, you want to do 7 minutes or 10 minutes?
7, it's good.
7? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So we'll do 7 minutes. I'll start us off with the bell again. Take a few moments after the bell to just kind of breathe and get yourself centered and ready to go. And then start reflecting on whichever day you picked. And you can walk through those questions however you want, right? But about where is God in all of this? Where am I noticing God? Where do I feel disconnected from God? Okay. You can turn your cameras off if you want as we move into this time.
It's almost done, Jim. You're in my video.
I want to invite you to wrap up and Start your video again when you're ready. So how was that experience for you?
I can see that I never understood how to do the examen when it was explained to me the first time.
Okay.
Mhm.
And did this feel easier to practice this time?
Yes, I wasn't really told to work a prayer into it. And just, I was told basically every night before you go to bed, write down 5 things that you were grateful for. And it's just like, oh, it's the same thing. You know, it just,
Right.
it did not relate
Yeah.
to me, but this does. It,
Good.
of course, I'm a few years older now too.
Yeah, and some things that didn't work in certain seasons will work in others as well. So thanks, Marisa.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
Well, I was thinking about Monday, which was my husband's birthday. And we just spent it at home. We didn't, you know, there were good, there were bad, there was, I think he was very stressed because of all the news. He always reads all the news, and you know, especially the news coming from Afghanistan and things like that. That was stressful. And plus, he worries about um, my son kind of wanted to come over, but um, my husband said, no, don't come over because that's just another trip for you. And you know, we'll just talk on the phone. So we did speak on the phone, but and then I always like to bake, and our oven was broken. And so I didn't get to bake him a cake. I always like to do that for everybody who's having their birthday in the family. So those were the things that were causing, I don't know about feeling separated from God, but just for not, I would say it was not things working out the way that we would like them to work out.
Sure.
And then, but one thing, his cousin who lives in Texas called him, and she was like, he's an only child, and she was kind of like a sister to him growing up. They lived close nearby each other, and he said if there was anybody who would be his sister, it would be Alice. So she did well. She texted us, and I was sort of in the middle of it, just and he was really happy to hear from her, and she wanted a picture of him, so I sent her a picture, and she said, well, that looks like, she said, I haven't seen him for 20 years, and so she liked his picture, and she said, well, I see him, that's still Bill, but I can see a lot of Daddy Hal. who was his grandfather.
Mhm.
And I said, well, that made him happy. And so it was one of those days, you know, it was not, you know, there was good and there was bad and there was stress in a way, but it was still, there were good little things coming up too.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was thinking.
Often we sense God's presence through others. It sounds like
Yes.
you had an awareness of some moments of connection with others,
Right.
some moments of disconnection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You not being able to show love in the way you wanted to with the cake, your son
Yeah.
not being able to come over, right? So you were in that space of awareness of those moments of connection and moments of disconnection. So thank you for
Right.
sharing that, Merle. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I found it helpful to narrow the focus to just a 24-hour period. When I first read the chapter, I was thinking, oh, how do I go back and find something to focus on? But I like the idea of picking a smaller time period. And I personally am trying to stay in the now, the today, and not worry too much or not to be too stressed or not, get overwhelmed by items. And I liked that, to pick a smaller time period and reflect on that.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else?
I also went with the last 24 hours, and I could share a lot of different things, but I'll just say that I focused on when I noticed God, or I put a time when I didn't feel like I noticed God, and maybe it's not fair because every night I ask God for dreams and visions and words of knowledge that He might have for me, and I don't feel like He shared anything with me last night that I could remember. But then I also, it was really easy for me to find things that I was most grateful for or exhausted, and that drew my attention. So.
Good. Thank you.
It's not exactly like the weekly one. I kind of like what's in the book.
And that is good. I think the best thing we can do is give ourselves permission to adapt, and to find ways to connect with God that work for us. So not every practice here will resonate. Not every practice will resonate exactly the way it's presented in the book, and that's okay. The goal is for you to be creating your life with God, right? And that's going to be different and unique, just like all the different relationships that you have. There's not a cookie cutter way of, interacting with everybody in your life. And there's no one size fits all approach to how we create a really intimate connection and awareness with God either. So I am grateful for your time today and for your willingness to continue to explore different avenues. Next week, we are going to do creativity. And in the book, it talks about needing to pick an activity that you can do together. And so I am going to find a couple of different adult coloring pages in with a prayer focus, and I am going to email those out. So if you want to pick one that you like and print it out before we get together the next time, if you have crayons or markers or colored pencils, you can use whatever you want. If you need those and don't have them, stop by the office. We'll hook you up with some at the church. We got a bunch. And that way we can use that as our practice when we come together. So watch for that email this week and just have one of those pages printed when we get together again. Okay? All right. Blessings to you all. Let's pray the Lord's Prayer as we close out our time together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Blessings, friends.